Hi, I'm Jake Ross. I work here as the Network Security Sales Specialist at Bytes, and today I'm joined with Stuart Green from Checkpoint, and we're going to be talking a little bit about cloud security posture management. So, Stuart, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm Stuart Green. I work in the overlay team within Checkpoint, and I'm one of the cloud security architects. So I work with our end users, our customers, and our channel partners with anything relating to CloudGuard, which is quite a lot of technology, which we'll hopefully get into very shortly.
Cool, that's brilliant. So I guess some of the focus today is to talk about cloud security posture management. The first question for me is, what is it?
That is a good question, and one that we get quite a lot. As I'm sure you're aware, and you'll probably hear throughout this conversation, there is a lot of acronyms out there in the industry, specifically in technology. Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM, is a technology that allows you to see what's going on in your cloud environment, which in itself can sound a bit vague. And some people will put this in the area of compliance, reporting, monitoring almost. And specifically when you're talking to people who are familiar with more traditional technologies, especially from Checkpoint, because obviously where we come from is our firewall and network security heritage. People think, oh, it's a bit like reporting and a bit like alerting. It's potentially a lot broader than that. So if you imagine you're a customer or you're a business that's moved some of your traditional workloads into cloud, cloud can be a number of things to a number of different people. For example, if you look at the Amazon AWS or the Microsoft Azure service catalogs, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of different services in there, each with their own, sometimes descriptive, sometimes fairly bonkers names that don't necessarily say what they do. As a business, it's very easy to start off in public cloud and say, oh, that service looks good, that service looks good, we'll use that, that serves a particular purpose. And before you know it, you've got this massive sprawl of services and tools running in public cloud that you don't really have a strong handle on. And that can pose a security risk, because if you know, in the media, there are a lot of news stories and articles over the last 4 or 5 years, I suppose, covering data leakage that has come from poor configuration of cloud services. S3 buckets is something you'll hear quite a lot. It's not specific to AWS, happens in other cloud platforms as well. Won't go too much into details there, but a lot of the data loss from those services comes from the fact that somebody in a business has said, this is a really convenient service, I'm going to use that, set it all up, deployed it, put in the credit card details, job done, move on to the next task. The focus hasn't been there for how to properly configure that service. And a lot of these services in public cloud are really easy to consume versions of something that in a traditional world or data center, for example, that would have taken weeks, if not months, of training and setup to get it working just right. In cloud, because it is so convenient, people set it up and forget about it, move on to the next thing, and that's where the gaps come in. So Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM, is a broad tool that looks at these cloud platforms as a whole and says, what have you got configured, and does it match up with some of the best practices that we recommend? Or do you have a formal obligation in the shape of something like GDPR or ISO or PCI DSS or HIPAA? Any of those standards each have technical checks that can be mapped through posture management. So for example, I said about the storage buckets, the S3 buckets. If you had used one of those as a business and it was poorly configured and wide open to the world to just have somebody stroll by and say, oh, some data, I'll take that, it would alert you to that fact and say, you've poorly configured this, this is open to the world, this is what you should do. That's a real brief summary of what CSPM is at its core. There are a lot of extensions to it, and some of the use cases for it give quite interesting scenarios for customers who are involved in public cloud.
Thank you. Yeah, that's been really helpful. So we talked a little bit about, I guess, some of the traditional technologies that Checkpoint have. You've done a lot of work in the data center previously, and now you're stepping into cloud. And yes, people have this wide footprint. I guess if someone engaged with Checkpoint say, hey, could you help me understand my cloud environment? What would they expect that to look like when working with you guys?
So it varies hugely. My role within Checkpoint is working, as I say, with customers and with partners. So there are quite often a number of different conversations, and the level of maturity when it comes to cloud with those customers is equally as broad. So we have some customers who have come from the start of Checkpoint's journey, and we've mapped with their sort of IT security, network security journey as well. So they are our core firewall security gateway customer. As the cloud has become more mature for those types of customers, they will naturally be drawn to cloud through some of the technologies and changes in what's available in public cloud. So the conversation there for us goes from, I've got a firewall, I've got a load of cables going into it, it's in a dark and dingy data center. How do I map that to the public cloud? That doesn't necessarily fit into the CSPM piece, although there are elements of it that do overlap. So that's one part of the conversation, but it's a segue into the CSPM piece. You get your cloud firewall, your virtual machine, your compute, you put that in public cloud. Once you're in there, that then opens up the landscape, I suppose, to talk about these things that you put in public cloud. Do you actually understand what they are and what the implications are of having a SaaS database or a Lambda function or a serverless function or something that's new to cloud that you might have adopted, but you don't necessarily fully understand. So the biggest difference is in the traditional realm, you mostly have something you can touch and something you can hold. So the security of that device is very much your responsibility. You can go into your data center, you can touch, you can hold it, and heaven forbid, if you get breached, you can pull all the cables out and, you know, at least rest for a few minutes until you gather your thoughts and think of how to fix that particular problem. In public cloud, it's very different because you're bound to using the tools that are provided to you in how to manage your security. And if you're faced with something that happens quite often with customers, is that they will go headfirst into a cloud deployment. They get all these services, maybe that they've deployed themselves, maybe that they've gone through a digital transformation partner, and they've inherited one way or another this massive services in the cloud. They don't always understand what they are. So to not have the physical control over what these services are, that could be quite difficult to come to terms with. And having a tool like a CSPM or a posture management platform gives them that level of control and visibility back. So instead of knowing where to look to find out whether you've got a particular service configured in a specific way that is secure and you've got it deployed in the right region, you would fire a CSPM tool at the cloud platforms and say, tell me what's good and what's bad. And it'll come back very quickly and give you the overview of what is good and what is bad in your cloud account. So that helps customers move from the traditional hands-on realm into public cloud by giving them some similar feeling tools and approaches across the two different realms, if you will.
That makes sense. And so we've got these customers that have moved to cloud. They potentially have customers that have joined businesses and adopted a large cloud adoption. How would a tool like this differ from, I guess, the native tools that you might already have if you subscribe to Azure or subscribe to AWS? That
is a very common and a good, somewhat challenging question for a security vendor that is often seen as competing with those tools. The cloud platforms are, when they offer services to their customers, they are predominantly trying to fill a hole for that particular function, be it storage, compute, database, any of the other number of functions that you get in the platforms. Security isn't always their first thought. They are getting a lot better. AWS, Azure, GCP, they're all slowly progressing with their security tooling. And some of the tools are fairly reasonable to use in the platform. Where we come in as an independent security vendor is our focus is purely on security. So whereas they're trying to produce and develop and mature the services that customers use to achieve their business goals or their technology goals, we are only focused on securing those. So we are naturally at the next step in securing that service. And we like to consider ourselves further ahead in providing proper security on the services that the cloud platforms offer. So while there are things in place that at the cloud vendor's own, not admission, it makes it sound like a fault, but by their own description, they say that we will try and offer a minimum level of security. So something like the AWS firewall, that is, when you compare it to a dedicated offering, quite simplistic and quite basic. It will tick a box if that's what you're after. But if you're truly interested in next generation or sort of dedicated focused security, then an independent vendor such as ourselves are going to fill that gap much more comprehensively.
That makes sense. And I guess Bytes have been taking this message out as well, and we've been having a few conversations with customers. Would it be fair to say we've also, I guess, been talking to people about this tool that potentially have more than one cloud adoption. So they potentially have a solution in Azure or a different solution in AWS, potentially a third solution again in a Google-like technologies. With Checkpoint, we're able just to put in one solution and have a holistic view of that status. Can you tell me any more about what that might look like?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the big benefits of using a third-party tool is the ability to cover multiple platforms. The native tools are fairly adequate in most cases, but they will only cover their own services. So, for example, there are tools in AWS that will give you a limited feature set when it comes to posture management or compliance checking on their tools. There is a similar product in Azure and a similar product in GCP and Ali Cloud and Oracle Cloud. You end up managing lots of different point tools to achieve a goal. And that's been part of Checkpoint's messaging for as long as I've worked with Checkpoint, which has been a while now. So the overalling ease of management is a Checkpoint message. And that comes very much from our firewall and security gateway heritage. Our gateways are among the easiest to manage in the industry, and we're trying to take that message and that approach to public cloud vendors as well. So our CSPM offering allows you to onboard or assess the data from Azure, AWS, GCP, Ali Cloud, soon to be Oracle Cloud, plus Kubernetes as well. So it covers pretty much the whole spectrum of what you would expect your cloud estate to look like from one console. So if you want to see where your workloads are for a particular unit within the business, you log into the one portal and it will give you all of the information you need about that without having to go through the native console or even finding which native console it exists in. If you're specifically looking at addressing a security threat, it might be that your SOC or your NOC have got an IP address that says, we've seen a threat to this IP, go investigate. First, they've got to track down where it is. Then once they're in the platform where that IP lives, broadly speaking, you have to find what service it's associated with. And that whole action and that whole process could take hours, even days sometimes, depending on the size of your cloud estate. So having everything in one place is a huge advantage. All you would have to do is search for the IP address or the name of the instance or the FQDN, whatever indicator or information you've got, put it into the search box, and that will search very quickly across all of the platforms that you've got connected to the account.
I do. Cool. And prior to us, I guess, starting this recording, we spoke a little bit around software development lifecycle as well. Could you just tell me a little bit more about, I guess, what Checkpoint are doing in the space, especially with
yeah,
tools?
So on the surface, that might seem like a slightly odd tangent, but it is very, very much part and parcel of the cloud conversation. And you're fortunate that I'm not presenting any slides today, but we've got a number of slide decks. And there's one really useful slide that shows that the cloud adoption and maturity scale. So at one end, you've got your firewall customers, people that are doing firewalling, network security in a data center, an office. Maybe they've got a firewall security device sitting on a desk. It doesn't really matter about the size. It's more the approach and the use of technology that's relevant. Next step on from that is virtual machines, where you're virtualizing the firewall or the physical machine capability, and you're making better use of the hardware. Next step on from that might be moving into public cloud. So you take something that you virtualize and you look after, and you move it into a cloud managed environment or a public cloud managed environment where the cloud provider runs that virtual machine capacity or that capability for you. Moving on from that, then you've got containers, which is a further abstraction of the idea and the approach to virtualization. But instead of caring about the underlying hypervisor or the underlying hardware, you just provide an image which is dedicated to one specific task. Further on from that, you've then got serverless, which is very much taken away from where we started in. We're talking about network security or security based on a physical device. We've gone through virtualizing, we've gone through slimming it down to look at a particular task. Now we're just providing code to a cloud provider in something like AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, where now the focus of that particular security vector is the developer. So you've got the firewall admin guy, the network guy, the operations guy, who all have a part to play in provisioning hardware, networking, power, and the security policy on top, to something like Lambda, where you've just got a developer that submits code. It just exists on the internet. You don't really have any traditional security infrastructure around it. So you've moved from network security to talking about software development lifecycle. And that is fortunately part of CloudGuard. We have a tool called Shift Left, and earlier this week we announced an acquisition of some technology called Spectral. And They specialize in analyzing code and the building blocks of that particular code or that project. So again, another thing that you would hear about in the media is supply chain attacks. So if you imagine you've got a software project, it's very rare that you would develop all of that software yourself, and you will pull in libraries, modules, and packages from third parties. Log4j or Log4Shell as the most recent instance of that. That is a module very commonly used, and there was a very high severity vulnerability found in it that allows attackers to execute code just by sending a string to it. That's something which can be picked up very effectively in the software development lifecycle. And without branching off too much into a full DevOps conversation, the idea behind it is that you run an automated check early on in the software development lifecycle and make sure that you're not introducing these vulnerabilities into your code, your service, your web application before you push it out to production. The idea being you've got this long pipeline of different checks and different automations. Software goes in one end and some sort of service comes out the other. Somewhere between the start and the finish, you can introduce security into that. And that's where our tool called Shift Left comes in as part of the CSPM platform. In the future, Spectral will be part of that, or we'll introduce it into our stack in one way or another. Very early days yet. I think we've only owned them for 72 hours at the time of recording. So still a lot of it to be decided, but that's the approach and that's where we're going. So as an integral part of cloud, that is part of the journey that we support as well.
So watch this space. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. Yes.
Cool.
I've had a quick look at it, and it looks like really, really interesting, really exciting technology. But I am known for being a bit nerdy about stuff like that. So it's very much one of the things I'm enthusiastic about.
Okay. Great. Cool. I've got one more question for you.
Of course.
So quite often, I guess, we're speaking to customers about their posture in the cloud, what that looks like, and customers can be on a varying scale of maturity of cloud adoption. Some are maybe going, well, actually, we're not even there yet. We just know it's a project that's coming in the next 6 months. And we've got others that have been in it for years, and there's this massive spread. A tool like the cloud posture management, who is that aimed at? Is that from day one, we should be putting this in and start with a strong posture? Or are you guys kind of seeing more, I guess, conversations with those that have gone, well, hold on, we've had this mess for the last 5 years. What do we do with it?
All of them, but both ends. We've got customers who are new to cloud and they want to use this tool as a kind of warm hug along the way and their journey to adopting public cloud. In that, I mentioned before, when you go into public cloud, it can be quite overwhelming with the amount of services you've got, and each of those services is a sort of virtual SaaS offering of something that might have been one person or a team's job exclusively in the past. The CSPM platform in that context can be really useful for guiding you along your migration. As you start adopting services and configuring them, it will give you very quick feedback sort of within 10, 15 minutes as to whether or not what you've deployed is in line with best practices or with CIS or ISO or GDPR, for example. If you provision a cloud storage something or other as part of your migration and you accidentally deploy it into China, that's going to come back and say, this isn't GDPR friendly. You should be deploying this into the EU, for example. And there are thousands of things that it can pick up on because these cloud platforms are so broad, and there are thousands of misconfigurations that can and do get made. For more advanced customers and sort of everywhere in between, we do get people that inherit the mess. So they've had a cloud deployment, they've been running for a number of years, and then they think we should really have a handle on what this cloud stuff is and what it entails, what we've got lurking in the dark corners of AWS, Azure, GCP, and other platforms. We get some customers who connect CSPM up to it and think, oh, we've got some work to do. Let's crack on. Most people that are that advanced with that many entities in public cloud do have a reasonable hold on it. So it's more for them about being a platform to enable future automation. So again, the type of customers we speak to have a varying level of maturity when it comes to public cloud. And as such, their technology is at different levels of maturity too. So at the entry level, it is generally more of a reporting and an alerting platform to let them know when they've done something wrong. But at the more advanced end, you can turn that into triggers for automation. So instead of you getting an email that says you've got to log in and click these buttons to fix something, you don't know about it and it just gets automated out. So the example I gave around S3 or storage buckets being configured poorly, the platform can detect that, trigger an automation script and say, this is what you've told me to do if this is ever spotted, and fix it for you. And it will only tell you if that action fails or keeps popping up, depending on what the criteria are that you set. So that's where the more advanced customers tend to sit within the platform. On the more advanced end, we do have customers that are using the more advanced parts of the platform as well. So workload protection, the web application firewall technology, and the network intelligence element as well. They tend to be more for our advanced customers, but we do have customers across the spectrum using all of the technology. So it's very flexible. It's not like it's a super complicated tool. If you want to just start using it to get a feel for what's going on in your cloud platform, whatever that might entail, then you onboard it and within 30 minutes, you'll be up and running with nice visualizations and graphics representing what public cloud is for you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we've certainly seen that too. It's not been a, hey, do you want to see what this looks like? Let's work on it for the next 6 months. It's right, let's tick a couple of boxes. 30 minutes later, we'll start collecting data and have some capability. So
definitely. It can be incredibly easy, or if you want to dive straight in head first, then you can take advantage of the automation, the custom rule sets, the APIs, and you can make of it whatever you want. It's a platform that's built on top of APIs, and if you want to integrate that with your own services portals or workflows or automation platforms, the capability is there to make some fairly impressive stuff.
Cool, ideal. Well, thank you so much for giving us some time. I guess if you've been watching this video and you found it helpful and think, I'd like to know more about that, please do reach out to your account manager. We'd love to talk to you, or as Stuart said, we could take you through a demo or potentially even a POC as well.